See, your murderers come with smiles. They come as your friends, the people who have cared for you all of your life, and they always seem to come at a time when you're at your weakest and most in need of their help.
On May 24th, 2022, Ray Liotta, the talented veteran film star best known for his breakout performance as Henry Hill in Martin Scorsese's mafia-themed masterpiece Goodfellas, sat down for a meal at a fancy steakhouse in the Dominican Republic, flanked by his gorgeous fiancée, JC Nitolo. The actor was in town filming a new movie titled Dangerous Waters about a young woman on a sailing trip with her mother to Bermuda that goes terribly wrong when the boat is attacked by a group of criminals. It's classic Liotta, bringing credibility and a name to a small-budget film and elevating the material to a fun and thrilling diversion without taking itself too seriously, but also not slipping into outright camp. Not that he was above having some campy fun when the script called for it, as he just wrapped filming on a movie called Cocaine Bear about, you guessed it, a coked-up bear in the woods that goes on a killing spree. It was clear Liotta was in the midst of a bit of a career resurgence, fielding lots of offers after garnering positive reviews in recent years with roles in Noah Baumbach's critically acclaimed Marriage Story in 2019, and the long-awaited Sopranos prequel, The Many Saints of Newark, in 2021. He'd also gotten his personal life on track after a few hiccups in the 2000s, including mostly amicable divorce from his wife, Michelle Grace, in 2004, and a DUI in 2007 after he crashed his Cadillac Escalade into a couple of parked cars in the Pacific Palisades. His beautiful fiancée, JC, had a lot to do with mellowing him out. She was a former hairstylist familiar with the Hollywood scene, and both were divorced, each carrying some of the scars and baggage of past relationships, but also with the wisdom and perspective that comes along with such things. Not that it made Liotta any less enthusiastic about proposing to JC over Christmas in 2020, which he gushingly posted about on Instagram with the caption, "Christmas wishes do come true. I asked the love of my life to marry me, and thank God she said yes." Hearing the man who rose to fame playing characters with a sort of twitchy intensity, think of Henry Hill's cocaine-induced paranoia scenes in Goodfellas and Gary Figsy Figgis's crazed rants in Copland, rhapsodize about being in love is a little jarring, but it was perfectly consistent with what people who actually knew Ray Liotta saw and heard on a regular basis. Ray's daughter, Carson, from his first marriage, was exceptionally close with her father, following in his acting footsteps with roles in movies like Hubie Halloween and Teenage Badass. She would hang out with her famous dad on movie sets and even played matchmaker for her divorced dad, setting him up with JC after attending a party thrown by JC's son Chaz by telling her, quote, "I want you to go out with my dad. I think you'd be perfect for my dad." JC was initially reluctant to date someone in the film business. Her ex, Joey, was a film producer himself, but eventually relented, and the two quickly became inseparable, attending red carpets and snapping pics from beach vacations like a couple of teenagers in love. Just a few weeks earlier, the couple was snapped by photographers strolling hand in hand after grabbing lunch at an Italian restaurant in the Pacific Palisades neighborhood of Los Angeles. And it was more of the same this evening at the Nakan Steakhouse in the Dominican Republic. Ray, dressed casually in a white V-neck t-shirt and black jeans, posed for pictures with the restaurant owners and snapped cute photos with JC all night. Although his hair and beard were nearly completely gray, he looked relaxed, fit, and trim in the pictures. Just 2 days later, he'd be gone. Ray Liotta was 67 years old. I'm Derek Kaufman.
I'm Jason Beckerman.
And this is Last Days, Ray Liotta.
According to the autopsy report, Liotta died as a result of atherosclerotic disease, which basically refers to the buildup of fats and cholesterol in the walls of his arteries. Officials in the Dominican Republic cited pulmonary edema as a contributing factor in his death, essentially meaning that there was an accumulation of fluid in his lungs that ultimately compromised his heart and respiratory functions. According to the post-mortem examination, his death occurred approximately 8 to 10 hours before the autopsy was performed on his body, around 3:22 p.m. on the afternoon of May 26th, indicating that the actor had, in fact, passed away in his sleep. The reaction from Hollywood to news of Liotta's passing was immediate and fittingly heartfelt. The crew from Goodfellas were the first to express their sadness at the sudden loss. Martin Scorsese, who directed Ray in Goodfellas, said, quote, "I'm absolutely shocked and devastated by the sudden, unexpected death of Ray Liotta. He was so uniquely gifted, so adventurous, so courageous as an actor. Playing Henry Hill in Goodfellas was a tall order because the character had so many different facets, so many complicated layers. He absolutely amazed me, and I'll always be proud of the work we did together on that picture. Robert De Niro, who co-starred alongside Liotta in Goodfellas, said, quote, "I was very saddened to learn of Ray's passing. He is way too young to have left us." Lorraine Bracco, who played Liotta's wife Karen in Goodfellas many years before working with James Gandolfini on The Sopranos, said she was utterly shattered by the news, saying, quote, "I can be anywhere in the world and people would come up to me and tell me their favorite movie is Goodfellas." Jennifer Lopez, who worked with Liotta for 3 seasons on the NBC cop drama Shades of Blue, wrote, "The first thing that comes to mind is he was always so kind to my children. Ray was the epitome of a tough guy who was all mushy on the inside. I guess it's what made him such a compelling actor to watch, the original Goodfella." Josh Brolin paid his respects to the late actor, writing, "My buddy, my friend. How so soon? Why? I'll miss you. I always looked up to you. The work was always so good, but the man you were always stood out among the rest of them." Even Seth Rogen, who starred with Liotta in the dark comedy Observe and Report, gave a heartfelt statement about the actor, saying, "I can't believe Ray Liotta has passed away. He was such a lovely, talented, and hilarious person. Working with him was one of the great joys of my career, and we made some of my favorite scenes I ever got to be in. A true legend of immense skill and grace."
As important as the recognition and remembrances from colleagues were, the comments from those closest to Ray really tell more of the story of who he was. Just a few days after he passed, Liotta's fiancée JC posted about the devastating loss, saying, quote, "My life these past couple of years have been nothing but truly magical. Ray and I share a deep love that I will cherish in my heart forever. We laughed daily, and we were inseparable. The chemistry was wild in the best way. He was everything in the world to me, and we couldn't get enough of each other. He was the most beautiful person inside and out that I've ever known, and even that is an understatement." And his daughter, Carson, who had set them up originally, was more succinct, but no less sincere in reflecting on the loss, posting an adorable photo of her as a young girl with Liotta, along with the caption, "Those who knew him loved him. You're the best dad anyone could ask for. I love you. Thank you for everything."
He died so suddenly. It was so out of the blue. There were no indicia that he was sick. He obviously suffered from high cholesterol, it seems, and
Yes.
that's what ended up taking his life.
But he wasn't out of shape.
But he wasn't out of
He
shape.
was in love. Those are things that typically elongate your
Right.
life. Being in shape and being in love are indicators
Right.
that you're going to live a long, happy life.
It's sort of the most terrifying thing is people as they get older, myself included, that sometimes what is unknown and unseen it can kill you. And I remember when he died, the outpouring of support was incredible. It's especially difficult when you don't see it coming. He had this lovely new fiance. He had this lovely kids who clearly cared about him dearly.
It's easy to contrast
Yeah.
him with someone like James Gandolfini because I
That's
look at
right.
the Lorraine Bracco comment. She worked with both of them. But when James Gandolfini died, he was a man of immense appetites. And he was in Rome, and the story was he ate
Well,
to
the
such
stories of his
excess.
drug use were well known in Hollywood. He's
Lots of
obviously
drug use.
profoundly overweight, and people knew that about him. So
It was shocking,
it
but
was
in a different way.
That's right.
Ray Liotta seemed like a guy who was going to be with us. He was so active in film. You look at his filmography, this guy put out a ton of
Yeah.
movies. He would sometimes film up to 10 in a year. Not all that you've heard of, not all great products, but he was a very active, working thespian. in
Yeah,
Hollywood.
it was just the tragedy of his loss is really profound.
It really is. Let's go ahead and take a quick break. More on Ray Liotta's incredible legacy after.
It almost seems unfair to reduce an actor with nearly 90 movies to his name, not to mention a raft of television shows and appearances over a career that spanned 4 decades, to performances in just 2 movies. But Ray Liotta will forever be defined by the indelible imprint he left on Hollywood in the back-to-back classics released in 1989 and 1990, Field of Dreams and Goodfellas. Like many actors, Liotta's path to film stardom was more of a winding road than a meteoric rise. He attended the University of Miami, where he studied acting and graduated with a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in 1978. After college, he moved to New York and scored a talent agent, landing a regular role in the soap opera Another World for the first few years of his career in the late 70s and early 80s. Liotta's big break came in the movie Something Wild in 1986.
Come on, Charlie, you gotta admit, she looks like she could fuck you right in half. I mean, just fuck you to pieces.
Ray, there's no call for that kind of talk.
You're right. You're right. I understand. Sorry, Charlie.
Liotta played the violent ex-convict husband of Melanie Griffith's character in the comedy Thriller, which has become a bit of a cult classic, even though it made only $8 million at the box office. And Liotta's performance, he mixed his natural charm with a bit of dark comedy and genuine menace, marked the beginning of a signature style and earned acclaim from critics, even scoring a Best Supporting Actor nomination at the Golden Globes.
Jason, I've seen Something Wild, and I quite like the movie. What stands out most when you see it now is Melanie Griffith, and I believe it's Jeff Daniels, are already established actors. And so you're in this movie. Ray Liotta was a nobody. He was a guy from soap operas. And he comes on the screen and he crackles. You just sort of see him. He had those like piercing eyes. In a lot of the scenes, he playing this intense, abusive guy. So he's going head to head with Jeff Daniels and Melanie Griffith. And he's just chewing the scenery, but in a good way, not overacting, but just sort of stealing scenes left and right. And you knew you were prepared for someone who's going to have a real career in Hollywood.
I think what stands out about him and all these performances you're talking about, I've seen Something Wild as well. He had a voice that was really different than other people's.
The timbre of it was different.
The timbre of it, that's right. It was very deep with other people with deep voices, but he had sort of a rasp to it. I think gave it a little bit more credibility than a lot of other actors have. He always seemed very authentic on screen, playing these various roles. In Goodfellas, that laugh, you never forget that, right?
You can. I mean, it's been memed to death, but in the moment, too, you feel like you're in the presence of a real guy. You know, there's no sense that he's sort of acting or too method. You're just sort of watching someone just do their thing and really sort of immerse themselves in a role.
Yeah, and he was actually able to parlay the buzz from Something Wild into additional opportunities, including a plum role in Kevin Costner's fantasy drama classic, Field of Dreams.
If you build it, he will come. Can I come back again?
Yeah. I built this for you.
Derek, judged against today's more cynical and self-aware film landscape, it's easy to dismiss Field of Dreams as sort of a weepy, nostalgia-drenched schmaltz fest. But the truth is that the movie was an absolute phenomenon in 1989. I mean, it was the biggest sort of thing within pop culture, I think, at the time. It's been quoted a million times. Even at the time, it was sort of that kind of movie.
It was. You have to sort of table your cynicism.
Right.
You know, we now know it as if you build it, they will come, or he will come. And it's the cornfield in Iowa, and you've got the long stairs of Kevin Costner. But at the time, it was taken very seriously. It was a good movie. People wanted to go see it, and he was a big part of it.
It's a good movie. I watched it recently with my kids. It doesn't really hold up because it is so schmaltzy.
Yeah.
But
you got ghosts playing baseball.
Right, but Liotta comes off as a very matter-of-fact, not schmaltzy character, right? His character sort of is like, you know, I like the fact you're dreaming, but don't dream too hard here, kid. You know, this is, it sort of comes in as sort of the wise, kind of not quite so schmaltzy character.
Yeah, you know, he's playing Shoeless Joe Jackson, who is a character who is controversial, right? So everyone knows Costner's character, Ray Kinsella, hears this mysterious voice and builds a baseball diamond, which attracts all these ghosts from the 1919 Black Sox scandal.
That's when the Chicago White Sox cooked the World Series, gave into it for bettors, through the World Series.
Through the World Series.
For bettors.
And so it's a very sort of important moment in baseball history. And the first ghost that comes to the field is the very famous Shoeless Joe Jackson, who's
one
the
of
most
the
famous
greatest
member
players of all time, right?
And he's this disgraced outfielder, and he comes to play with some of his old teammates. And Liotta, it's a difficult role to sort of thread the needle because there's a sense of wonder, but he's also naturally mischievous, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Shoeless Joe Jackson is a guy who bet on baseball and ruined the national pastime for a period of time.
Right.
And so you don't want to root for him entirely, but he's also this ghost in an Iowa cornfield. And he's able to bridge those two into something that is sort of magical.
So I want to set up Liotta and Kevin Costner. They're in this movie together. Costner obviously goes on to be one of the biggest stars in the world. He's got Dances with Wolves the very next year, actually famously beats out Goodfellas for Best Picture in 1990.
Sure.
And then goes on to a career.
Bull Durham. I mean, you don't have to
That
describe
story.
Kevin Costner.
Liotta doesn't. They're roughly the same age,
Mhm.
and you wonder if there was a possibility that these roles reverse, where Liotta becomes the world famous movie star, and Costner becomes kind of the guy that just picks up films like Liotta did along the way.
You're right. There's a bit of a sliding doors moment,
Yeah.
right? Because Costner has that sort of, he can play a farmer kind of look
Right.
to him. He's got the sort of lighter hair. Ray Liotta looks like a New Yorker. And
Yes.
that's why he's so good in Goodfellas. And he also looks not like a prankster, but like someone who has something going on that might be a little nefarious. And that's harder to
But
necessarily
why couldn't he
appeal
go
to
the
everyone.
De Niro route? You know,
Yeah, sure.
But you're right. He wouldn't have done Dances with Wolves. That wouldn't have been his style. But there are other movies later in Costner's career, you know, playing the GM of the Cleveland Browns in Draft Day that Liotta could have done, but he just,
Why couldn't Ray Liotta hold Whitney Houston as a bodyguard? No reason.
actually that's a perfect role. He might have been better than Costner.
Probably.
Probably couldn't have pulled off Robin Hood though.
Might have been a better movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Liotta was just getting warmed up, and at the end of the day, Liotta's performance in Something Wild and Field of Dreams were in supporting roles, leaving memorable impressions and a few quotable lines, but they weren't necessarily heralding the arrival of the next great leading man, to your point about when Kevin Costner just took off after those movies. But then, just a year later, Goodfellas comes out. And with all due respect to lovers of Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas is arguably the greatest film ever made by one of the greatest directors ever in the history of cinema. That's just the way Goodfellas gets talked about.
Yep.
It's in the conversation, at least if you're a Martin Scorsese fan, as his best work.
True Goodfellas fans will say The Godfather is wrongly credited as being the seminal, the greatest work of American mafia tale. They
Endless
say
debates.
It's Goodfellas.
Yes, you can imagine. I mean, this was played up in Barbie. Remember, like men talking about which mafia movie they like the most, talk about Goodfellas, and they talk about The Godfather. The film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and it ended up scoring a win for Joe Pesci as Best Supporting Actor. Rotten Tomatoes has called it, quote, arguably the high point of Martin Scorsese's career, and the film remains widely regarded as one of the best ever made, particularly in this gangster genre, continuing to spawn those spirited debates with The Godfather. The film has even been selected for preservation by the National Film Registry for the United States Library of Congress as, quote, culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant component of this cinematic history. And I wanted to put that in is Goodfellas is not just a movie, and it's not just a great movie. It's considered part of American film history, and that separates it from a movie like Field of Dreams, which is a great movie and people enjoy it and revisit it. Goodfellas is different. And it's Ray Liotta's performance as Henry Hill, a man enamored with the glamour of mafia life in the 50s who becomes one of the most infamous rats in mafia history, that stands at the middle of the film classic. A couple of things stand out about his work in Goodfellas. First, again, he was the relative newcomer on the set and going toe-to-toe with industry veterans and heavy hitters like Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro, and Paul Sorvino, not to mention working on a film with Martin Scorsese, who's already at this point a living legend. He more than holds his own and never seems out of place, and it's really no small task. Lesser actors, you could imagine being in a movie like this and getting very intimidated, shrinking behind the scene and sort of allowing actors like Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro to sort of do their thing and steal scenes. Or you could imagine someone overacting and overcompensating and trying to get noticed and being a little bit too eager. Liotta does neither. He strikes the perfect balance of being this magnetic presence in all of his scenes, propels the narrative forward, but he generously allows space for others, including Joe Pesci, who ends up winning a Best Supporting Actor.
It's not a classic leading man role, right? He's kind of the hub
a weasel.
on a wheel, right? And all these spokes of these incredibly famous actors are coming out of it. He's maybe has the most screen time, but he also yields much screen time to De Niro and Pesci and others. But it all comes back to his story, and he's the thread that.
He's the through line, and he is the glue of the entire movie, because you can't have Tommy DeVito, who's the hothead, and Jimmy the Gent Conway, who's De Niro's character, really shining if you don't have someone as the ballast to balance out the movie. Second, the role of Henry Hill is tricky because he's the hero of the film, as I said, but ultimately does something very unlikable when he turns on his mafia buddies to save himself. Sorry for the spoiler alert if you haven't seen Goodfellas, but I can't imagine you'd listen to this podcast if you haven't seen it. You need to like him as he navigates this exciting world of organized crime as a wide-eyed adolescent and into his drug-fueled descent. And Liotta pulls it off with the skill of a veteran actor. He finds the right tone to elicit sympathy in scenes like this one, where he's angrily yelling at his wife for flushing cocaine down the toilet in an effort to keep him out of trouble, but only creating more problems.
Karen! Where's the stuff that I left, Karen?
I flushed it down the toilet.
You what?
What was I supposed to do? They were all over the house.
Karen, that was worth $60,000. I need that money. That's all we got.
What was I supposed to do? They
Karen!
They were in everything.
That's all the money that we had, Karen. I was dependent on that. Why did you do that?
I had to.
Karen,
They were gonna find it.
Fuck, Karen. They would have never found it.
I swear to you, Henry. I swear, Henry, they would have found it. No.
Why did you do that? Why?
Would have found it.
Why did you do that, Karen? Oh my God. Oh my God.
The movie is just filled with iconic moments, but Liotta really has the tallest order. He's not just a fun hothead like Joe Pesci with menacing scenes and great dialogue. He's not just the quiet boss quietly cutting garlic in prison like Paul Sorvino, or even the cool-headed lieutenant pulling the strings behind the scenes like De Niro's character. Liotta has to give a genuine arc over the course of a movie. He changes as the fortunes of the characters move and shift over the course of the movie. It's a complicated role, and one for which he received acclaim, but I think it's almost become underrated with time as people look fondly back on memes of Joe Pesci's memorable lines. Liotta leveraged the success of his work in Field of Dreams and Goodfellas into a steady stream of work across the remainder of his career. If you look at his IMDb, Liotta was making 2 to 10 movies per year until he passed away, leaving behind a trove of material for his most ardent fans. Admittedly, nothing reaches the heights of his early work, but that's really more of a commentary on those first few films becoming part of the great American film canon. It really sets an impossible standard, and not all of his projects after Goodfellas can be discarded as forgettable flicks or paycheck movies. He turned in another nuanced performance alongside Sylvester Stallone, Harvey Keitel, and Robert De Niro as a cop trying to root out corruption in the ranks of a small department in Copland.
Don't shut me out, Ray. You found us a sweet little town, you got us the low interest, and I'm grateful. But don't forget who it was that you came to 2 years ago to cover your ass.
Get him out of here, Freddie!
It's not my fault that you can't look at him. You sit in this chair with your back to him. You want it to go away, but I'm still here. In for a penny, in for a pound. Don't shut me out, Ray.
Once again, Liotta stood shoulder to shoulder with some of the all-time greats and more than held his own, and once again proved to be a reliable presence in an ensemble cast featuring the best of the best. Overall, Liotta built a filmography that would be the envy of many actors toiling away in Hollywood, working in many different genres, and with some of the greatest directors around. The highs were obviously second to none, but the longevity and consistency is perhaps what stands out most. And that's what makes his sudden passing so tragic. It was clear that Ray Liotta had much more to give and would have undoubtedly remained a presence on screen for years to come.
Given the importance of Goodfellas in film history, it's easy to sometimes overlook Ray Liotta's performance in the movie that first put him on the map, Field of Dreams. And even if it's a bit more schmaltzy than his turn as the most famous rat in Mafia history, Liotta's role as the ghost of baseball's biggest scoundrel, Shoeless Joe Jackson, who finds himself in an Iowa cornfield in search of redemption, has left just as lasting of an imprint for future generations of cinephiles. And as we mentioned earlier, the part really tapped into that other piece of Ray Liotta that's often forgotten when people talk about his career, the sincere dreamer filled with hope and wonder. But it wasn't lost on Kevin Costner, who reflected on Liotta's passing a few months after his death and conveyed perfectly just how important he was to making Field of Dreams work. And so I wanted to give Costner the last word.
When Ray died back in May, I reminisced about how our batting practice moment together was not a stunt. It was real, and it happened as you saw it.
Yeah, you can hit the curveball.
I said that God gave us that stunt that night, and now God has Ray. And though he may be gone, that's the beauty of a game like baseball and a movie like Field of Dreams. He gets to live forever in our hearts whenever he steps out of that cornfield. He's become eternal. Long live Shoeless Joe, and long live Ray, who helped show us that when dreams come from the heart, they really can come true.